Morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to TechGig webinar series, our endeavor to impart techies. We believe that sharing of knowledge is the key to enhance our skills and grow us as professionals. With this principle in mind, we have initiated a series of webinars conducted by industry experts to give you all a crisp insight of various domains. The topic of today's session is Managing Complexity while Remaining Agile in Software Configuration Management. Our guest speaker today is Mr. Khurram Nizami, IBM Field Enablement Expert, IBM Software Group Rational. Khurram Nizami is responsible for worldwide enablement of IBM Rational products. His expertise is in helping customers and IBM by applying practical solutions to challenges faced by the software delivery community today. He worked with Rational before IBM's acquisition in 2003, and prior to that he was a manager in the systems development and integration practice at Capgemini Ernst & Young. His specialty and area of interest is geographically distributed development. Khurram holds a Master of Science degree in Management of Technology from the University of Minnesota and a Bachelor of Science in Computer Science from Auckland University. He is a PMS certified project management professional. He is a co-author of the Red Book, Collaborative Application Lifecycle Management with IBM Rational Products. He has written multiple articles and papers for industry-leading publications such as the Agile Journal and Dr. Dobbs. His current job focus is the JAS Collaborative ALM initiative, particularly with the IBM Rational Team Concert product and Agile development. So without further delay, I introduce you all to our guest speakers. Over to you, Mr. Nizami.
All right, thank you. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for taking the time to attend this webinar today. I'd like to go over the agenda that I'd like to cover for this session. This session is specifically to help differentiate how software configuration management is different than what we hear about the most probably in the industry, which is version control, and the rough definition of both of these. And also to give you an idea of how certain approaches to SCM can improve agility and accelerate delivery while still helping you to stay agile in the marketplace. So for the agenda today, I was planning to cover version control versus SCM, as well as the factors that are increasing the importance of SCM in development. We'll also cover the IBM Rational SCM portfolio. So there are a number of products that we have now that provide SCM. And then the unique benefits of RTC SCM. So how is RTC SCM different from what's available in the market today? And then finally, what would be the benefits of using the other capabilities that RTC has alongside an existing SCM that you have, and that could be ClearCase, Synergy, or an open source product if you're using some other product. Okay, so without wasting any more time, I thought I'd get into a definition of what is version control versus SCM, and I think most people are probably familiar with or use the term version control whenever you're in a software development project. You're probably It's a very common way of referring to how we're managing our changes for the project. And usually it mainly refers to the source code for the application, although you know, I think lots of organizations also version control completed binaries and other things such as documentation and related deliverables to each software or to any given part of the software project. I think in general, if you look at the definition of version control, it's basically just management of changes at the basic level, and it's referential. So these changes that you're collecting, they can be compared, they can be restored, they can be merged. And I think you'll find a lot of open source tools available in this space. That's the general playing field, which is providing these services for software projects. I would say that if you look at the tools that are out there like Subversion, Git, and others that are available, most open source tools focus on just providing you the core facility as well as the architecture, which may be different between them, for making changes. And then, as far as the surrounding code management and how you organize that code and manage it, it's really more up to the end user or to the group. I think many people that have been in software over the years, branch and merge management have been the mainstay of version control, moving into subversion more. So even Git, merge management, even branching is kind of a centralized concept. And people usually take this approach of, okay, well, if we need to branch, then we branch as we progress, and then we'll merge when necessary. And that may be a little bit too general, but I've seen this happen quite a bit in most projects where there isn't really a defined approach of when we do these branches and when we actually merge them. And then as far as if you're going to organize and manage components or how components are going to be shared, and different versions of those components are going to be shared throughout the various projects going on in the organization, that's more left up to the groups individually, and sometimes it's very loosely defined. I would say that's also true for how we isolate changes from each other as we're working on a project, and maybe even isolating changes from various teams as they work together to deliver a project. And then, integration to surrounding activities in development, security, and other things like that. Usually those are more specific to each implementation. And I've been in various organizations where it can be different even between the various project teams within the same organization. They each take their own approach that they'd like. And so when you try and get all of it together and organize and try and see how you may reuse across projects, it sometimes becomes a more complicated conversation. I would say on the other side, if you look at software configuration management, you'll probably identify that a lot of the commercial tools are playing in this space. Their goal is to provide more than just version control. It's to provide management, organization, and reuse of changes. There's a lot of concepts that are also included to help define and make these real in the version control tools or the SCM tools like baseline components and configurations. And I would say typically, we're talking about also associating and integrating closely related activities like build management, how you're going to do delivery of your end product, and then also the policies as far as when can somebody do a certain operation, and how you're going to manage security and control security to the larger software development part of this. So I think additionally what you'll find is there's also facilities that are provided for how SCM relates to the other things that are happening on the project. That could include testing and test planning and test case management, as well as requirements and even deployment. And I think probably the closest link that SCM has to another defined area in software development is change management or discipline, which would be change management, and how the change management tool then integrates with SCM to provide this change and configuration management solution. So that was quite a bit of talking in one slide, so I hope you're still with me. This is kind of the basis for starting this conversation, I think. So, why is SCM more important? I think almost everybody can appreciate the fact that most project teams and organizations are being asked to deliver more solutions, more at a higher level of quality with greater value, related more directly to ROI. But it still has to be lower risk. There's less time usually, and the costs have to be either the same or less, and the resources involved are usually fixed. So it's a difficult situation that needs to be dealt with. And some people would say, well, why would you add more complexity, like make the process more difficult in order to be more successful? And I think you have to think at least 2 steps ahead in order for this to make sense. Hopefully, you guys, as we move through, you can appreciate the message here. So I think what you'll also find is that as an organization starts to build software, when you're building one version or one product and it's first in the market, you're looking at the idea of adding more capabilities to the product, and it's typically a fairly easy. It's not hard to imagine that you can do that very quickly. I think as time goes by, as you have more and more applications in your portfolio with multiple versions, what you start to see is that the number of enhancements becomes limited now, and it's more about maintenance and supporting existing applications and runtime of applications, operational support, and that eats up more of your time and energy than actually improving the products that you're, and the end goal of the business, which is to constantly enhance and improve. So obviously this is an issue, so let's keep going here. I think what you'll find is that most commercial organizations these days are now developing software in a distributed manner with distributed teams. They need to be able to see and work together very effectively, and they still need to be able to isolate work so that you're not exposing complexity unnecessarily, and you let them work in isolation when they need to be productive, and then coordinate when necessary. And then wide area network support is obviously important. I've seen large organizations, I think you'll find even larger organizations breaking down into smaller teams to become more agile and focused on their delivery and their goals. And they typically will need access to more than just SCM. They'll need to do planning, defect tracking, build management at the very least, I would say. And so all of these things become important as they come together. I think usability and getting started are important aspects and should be enabled, whereas I'd say in the open source world is typically what you find is that features is the main focus, and sometimes usability is a secondary concern, and you assume a lot of what a person or what a set or group of people can do. Let's keep moving here. So a lot of people will say, well, when should I take more of an SCM approach versus just progressing with version control standard? I would say some of these factors would influence when an organization should start looking more seriously at doing SCM, when the development involves multiple interrelated teams or organizations. So you have various groups responsible for various parts of the product, and they all have to work together and bring together a common product. When there's multiple versions of a product or multiple products. And then typically when there's some sort of shared functionality or services or components across these multiple products, and they need to be updated together. And then when there's a greater need for control for how the code is going to be reused by the various software projects, or maybe even new projects as they start, and how is it going to be updated, how is it going to be managed. And then when the end software product it's more directly related to the revenue of the business. So we're not talking about, an intranet website that just posts some updates on business news. We're talking more about something related to how this business stays in business and how they make their money. Okay, so staying agile versus managing complexity, I think what you'll find is that it's fairly easy to stay or be agile when you've got smaller teams, when you're working on a simple single platform, when everybody's in the same room, when there's really no compliance issues to think about. People are pretty much, they know each other, they've worked together in the past, they know how to work with each other. Governance is informal, and everything's working fine. Now, if you move towards the right, I think what you'll find is that things become a bit more complex. There's limitations on what you can do, and then the agility of the group or the organization can be limited unless you're able to manage this in some effective way. So obviously, there's some organization, some sort of approach that you have to take as different than let's just start developing, and as things come up, we'll deal with them. That obviously doesn't work when you're dealing with more complex issues. As you can see, some of these are defined here. So I just wanted to cover, before I move on, the IBM Rational SCM portfolio that we have today. And you may be familiar with some of these products. ClearCase has been the long-stay of the core IBM Rational portfolio, even before the IBM acquisition. It's been about 10 years now since IBM acquired Rational. And it's historically been the most popular selling product even before Rational became a part of IBM, and still even as it became a part of IBM. It's highly integrated with ClearQuest, which is the change management core change and defect tracking solution. So together they make a change and configuration management solution, which was then further integrated to the rest of the IBM Rational products. If you look at ClearCase, what you'll find is that out of the box it provided this unified change management approach. It's basically an SCM process model that leveraged ClearCase's SCM capabilities like components and baselines and things like that. Synergy, on the other hand, was a heritage Telelogic SCM product. IBM Rational acquired Telelogic a number of years ago, and so Synergy also became a part of the IBM Rational SCM portfolio. So now it's called IBM Rational Change. Similar to ClearCase, there was also a change management product together making change and configuration management. I think you'll find this to be a fairly common trend even as you look at other SCM products in the marketplace. Typically, they're very closely paired to the defect or change tracking tool. It's usually the first connection that you make to a version control tool. And Synergy provided provides multiple configuration management process models and approaches to support varying levels of SCM needs. So you could take, there were out-of-the-box pre-configured process models that you could leverage to do various things, and you could use them interchangeably. And Telelogic has historically served the customer segment, the systems customer segment. So by no surprise, a lot of the Synergy customers were also systems-related customers. Now, RTC, it's the newest SCM solution in the IBM Rational portfolio, and probably in the marketplace, if you look at the larger set of SCM tools available today, you've got Git, Subversion, Team Concert, Synergy, ClearCase, and others that are out there like Dimension, CVS even still there. But if you find that RTC has been probably one of the newer products, I would say, that's actually approached the SCM market, and it's fairly rare for new entrants to come into the SCM marketplace and make a difference. Meaning they grab a majority of the market share, or they're able to grab a large set of users. So RTC is chain-set, stream-based solution. It was optimized for wide area network environments, and it provided basically process configuration beyond just SCM and change management, but basically covering a number of areas, including build management, planning, dashboarding, and other areas. Both ClearCase and Synergy have integrations directly to RTC, and with RTC's other capabilities besides SCM. So if you look at here's basically the larger picture of capabilities that RTC has. SCM is a core component of RTC. You could use it alone, but more likely, and really where a large amount of the value is unlocked, is you would use it with the other components that Team Concert provides. And again, you could interchangeably use and a lot of customers do that have ClearCase and Synergy would potentially use ClearCase and Synergy for SCM instead of RTC's SCM component. And in a similar way, you could use ClearQuest or IBM Rational Change instead of the work item management, or alongside, typically more likely alongside the work item management capability of RTC. Now, the focus of this session is really going to be on SCM, so I'm going to focus on that and talk about differentiating capabilities and things that you would want to think about when you're looking at SCM for your organization. And it doesn't, even at the end of the day, you know, if it's not an IBM Rational solution, just think about SCM and how you might organize around it with whatever product you're using, and that could be your, you know, an open source tool like Git or Subversion. But just consider the SCM concepts that you may want to think about implementing. Now, I think the bigger picture, and we just talked about some core activities like planning, dashboarding, build management, change management, work item management, that's typically very closely related to the development group. When you look at the larger software development lifecycle and all the things that happen to deliver a software product, you know, there's probably quite a bit more that's involved, and that includes the early on activities, you know, before you even start development and while you're doing development, like requirements and management, test planning and test management, as well as release and deploy management, and things after the product is actually built. And IBM Rational's approach or definition of this, of enabling a continuous approach to this, would be development operations or DevOps, and providing a enterprise capability for enabling that and making it effective. Okay, so I thought, you know, what would be helpful here is to show you how certain concepts, even before we start to get into them, are related across products, and then really more directly to show how, you know, if you look at an open source tool, which I would consider Subversion to be a version control tool, not an SCM tool, how, you know, sometimes a single concept like a branch or a revision or a tag, you know, could be leveraged beyond its main roots in order to support and enable certain things. So, you know, from the concept of a stream, in RTC they call it streams. Actually, branching is considered a dirty word in RTC, and even from the development team, so I never kept with the branch concept. It's more, but if you look at it, you can appreciate and relate to the idea of a stream versus, you know, a team branch in general. In ClearCase, UCM is called an integration stream, or just a stream, and then, you know, Synergy was called more project grouping. Subversion, it's a branch or trunk. Now, a repository workspace is where somebody, like a developer, could work on a set of changes in isolation and then share them with the team. And, you know, you could do that in Subversion with a branch as well, and you could probably even establish the ACL so that only you could get access to it, or maybe a set of people that you want. You would do that essentially with, you know, again a branch, and then establishing your control over that. And then similarly with the component, that would be a root folder, you know, essentially in the system. In ClearCase, there's actually a concept of component synergy as well. And then you would, in Subversion, it'd essentially be potentially a folder, I would say, you know, that's already been committed under version control. And then a component in a stream or workspace. And so again, UCM stream and a branch. And then the list keeps going here. So this is really just to show you the idea of various concepts across various products. And I think what you'll find is that things like baselines and snapshots and things that are typically like concepts for establishing greater management and control in tools that would call themselves SCM tools are typically leveraged in the idea of either branching and tagging, I would say. and I'm just making the relationships as a version. We could probably do different comparisons, but like when you over-leverage something, I think you potentially lose certain things that maybe even increase the complexity unintentionally. And I think it's worth looking at how you could potentially better manage that or at least simplify that. And so that's the goal of showing you why RTC SCM may be a different approach to SCM or even version control than a lot of people are typically used to. And I think if you've used ClearCase and Synergy, you'll probably be able to make the relationship much more directly, because RTC was built with those products in mind and leveraged the best practices of those things as far as SCM concepts and leveraging them, making them real objects in the system. So RTC is a change set-based SCM. It's not file-based. It raises the abstraction level so that you're not just talking about branching and merging as the main process for facilitating parallel development. There's real concepts such as private workspaces, components, streams, and baselines, and other things, as well as facilities to leverage and make efficient operations across these areas. There's real security built into the system, meaning all of these various things have the ability to manage and scope security as necessary. And I don't mean you shouldn't have to go down to an ACL file and update various things in order to establish security, and then how do you cascade security and manage it as it starts to move around? As you start to move around various things, how does that get more complicated or simpler, or at least status quo? It should stay the same, like not make it too complicated to deal with. And then governance. How does it integrate with other parts of the software development project that are important? There's more than just development going on in order to bring that product to a successful delivery at a level of quality that's acceptable. Okay, so to take a look at RTC's SCM collaboration structure, I think this is a larger build-out slide that you can see. And so what you'll find here is that we have sandboxes, which is where a given developer or somebody on their local machine, they may work on a set of changes to a given set of products. And they also have their own workspaces. You see these gray oval boxes. They could be working on lots of various different changes to various sets of products, and all of those are server-based, which means you could load a workspace down to your machine, which would be your sandbox, and then work on a set of changes, and then deliver those changes as you're ready to deliver them to the stream. You could consider that to be like the branch or merging your changes in with the rest of the team's changes. And then finally, those could also be delivered up to further streams to make up the overall delivery and development environment, or the SCM topology that you have. And so you can imagine multiple people doing this. They all have their own private workspaces. They also deliver and work on various products and product versions, which could be streams and other approaches that would be called the branch. And then those are also related to other branches or other streams, and those changes flow between them, and there's merging and other things happening. And if we looked at a branching structure for something more than trivial, I think and you ask somebody, let's make this a test question for getting into the company, come and sit down with me, take a look at this branching structure, and now can you please explain it to me in the next, we'll give you 10, 20 minutes. Can you explain what you're seeing here? I think it would probably be fairly difficult for somebody outside of the company to make an explanation unless they were familiar with what they were seeing, or somebody sat down and actually explained it to them. Okay, so what are components and how are they addressed in RTC? How is that different? So components, basically, add a dimension to what we call the stream or workspace relationship, and essentially it's like a root folder. I would say this is a fairly best practice. This is a common best practice is that as you build out your naming structure and your organizational structure for your folders, typically you would organize around components in certain folders, and then as you break it down, as you break your product down, and you'd name them, maybe even after the component, and then it would get versioned accordingly as well. But in RTC, it's beyond than simply, a simple folder name. Each of the components have baselines, or they can be versioned separately, and they can also be shared and delivered separately. So it's more than just, how are we just renaming what naming approach we're taking to the product that we're building. And hopefully as we move along, this will make sense. So imagine, you have a stream in RTC, which is where all of our team changes are. As I'm a developer here, I'm working on various parts of that application. I may want to work on certain components together to test how they work together, and maybe even make changes across them together for a given change, and I may deliver that up. So that's the first gray box. And maybe in the next set of changes that I'm working on, it's only 2 components that I really need to make changes to, and I may make changes to those, deliver them separately, and so on and so on. Imagine multiple people doing this at the same time and collaborating and working on various parts. So you're affecting the parts of the system that are important and necessary. Now, add another dimension of complexity here, and imagine certain components are only allowed to be worked on by certain people, and you have to manage the security for those across the system. So, things start to get more complex, and you try and answer that question, and then you add another, issue, or say, okay, well, there's actually 2 versions of the application. The first version is being worked on by this group of people in this organization. The other version is being worked on by this other group, or it's in-house by another group, and both of them should not be able to work on each other, but they still have a set of common things that they need to work on together. So you can see it starts to get complicated. So how are we going to solve this, and how are we going to deal with all these things? I think you have to introduce concepts that help you organize at a higher level. You shouldn't have to go straight down to, okay, well, let's name the tag, X underscore Y underscore Z underscore ABC. It shouldn't be like that in order to manage that, and essentially that you may find that to wear thin. So baselines and configurations are a concept in RTC that's introduced. Basically, it's an immutable set of changes or a change history to a given set of a collection of files, and that would be typically like a root folder that you could associate to. And they're chained together to allow change history, and you can reuse that change history in various streams and repository workspaces. And the configurations for these are also shared between them. So imagine, 3 baselines for a given component, yielding a given configuration, which has various versions of various files. And now you want to share those baselines and those components in various streams across various products. So visualize that, in a stream model versus, a branching model. And again, I would go back to asking the person you're interviewing the same question, can you make sense of this? It shouldn't be, it should be, obviously there is a certain thing, there's something to be said about seniority and experience, but there's also something to be said about making things effective, because I think what you'll find is that reuse automatically becomes limited when your development and version control environment becomes fairly complex. You'll find that, you automatically stop reusing, or your concept of reuse is, let's just copy that one thing and move it into this project, and then we don't even have to worry about how that, progresses in the other product. I think what you'll find is you're actually increasing complexity. You may be able to achieve your goal of reusing the software that you needed to, but for the organization, you've just introduced a layer of complexity. Snapshots is another concept where, let's say you've got these components. So again, they have various baselines or or at various levels of maturity with versions and updates. Now, collection of those components at various baselines create a configuration for your application, and that would be considered a snapshot. Typically in RTC, the way it works is you don't flow these snapshots up, meaning you don't merge them up, but you associate them to streams and build or workspaces. So they it's like taking a picture of what's there, and you can promote, those things between streams, and if those streams have components, they would also affect to those areas. Typically, like the build system will automatically take a snapshot every time a build takes place. So that's automatically something that you would get when you run a build in RTC or you have a continuous build going. It automatically will just take a snapshot. If you ever need to recreate a broken build, you just click on it, say, give me a workspace with all the code that is included in this particular snapshot that was taken when this build took place, and I would get all the code. I could work on it and then just update it and then again deliver it to fix changes. So here's what I mentioned is in RTC and in SCM tools, I would say what you'll find is that there is security control on the objects themselves, the SCM concepts. They're real objects. They're not just a concept that we're applying on top of the product that we have and the available concepts in that system. And that would include scoping security and visibility, as well as establishing ownership in the system. And you should be able to do that visually. You should be able to cascade such operations, as well as how groups are organized. And you shouldn't have to go down to ACL files and things like that in order to do that, because I think what you'll find is it becomes fairly complex very quickly. Okay, so the other thing is, parallel world, obviously you have conflicts. In Jazz SCM, basically what we're talking about is you don't deliver to create a conflict, meaning you don't merge in order to have a conflict, say, oh, I've got a conflict, I need to deal with it. Those conflicts should be visible even before you deliver, so automatically you should be able to see all of the conflicts that are being introduced or have been introduced based on what you're working on at that given time and what you're working against. And you should be able to retarget anything, like any given stream, and imagine that relationship to a branch and see automatically what those changes and conflicts are. And then as you flow between streams, you should also be able to see that. And that should be simple. It shouldn't be complicated. So the other idea would be, okay, now I'm working on a set of private changes against a given stream. So is my coworker, and they also have access to this stream, and they are working on a set of changes. We're working together. We may be working on various things, but I should be able to then share my changes directly with that person even before I share them with the rest of the team. And that should all happen through the version control system. And RTC, obviously, it provides facilities for that. The other thing that's fairly common, even in version control systems, is you establish certain rules saying certain things have to happen before you're allowed to do something like commit your changes or deliver your changes up to the stream. We don't want any unused imports. We want a clean workspace. Everything should be related to a descriptive comment or change set in the deliver operation. So those things should be very easy to apply. These rules should be easy to apply, and you should be able to reuse them or even allow teams to override them when appropriate. And when a conflict or when a rule is broken or it's being violated, you should be able to provide the end user with a fix or a quick fix. The other thing I would say is, and I think you'll find this in products like Team System, Microsoft TFS, as well as RTC, providing facilities for shelving or suspending work, and then so it's basically pausing the work that you're working on and then being able to then work on something else. Maybe it's a conflict, you ran into a merge conflict, you suspend it, work on something else, and then resume it, and then deal with the conflict then. So you should be able to work on those kind of things, as well as reproduce anything that happens in the build system very, very quickly, meaning you have a build, it breaks, you should be able to, in a few clicks, be able to recreate that build and work on those changes, and that should all be managed by the SCM system for you, or at least enable you to do that in a more productive way. Here's a view of the stream structure for Team Concert, and this is in one of the earlier versions of the release, but you can see, let's say we've got a 2.0 version of a given component in a larger product, in this case the source control component. There's the work item component as well, and there's multiple versions of this. Now there's various relationships between those and the versions, and their interrelated versions, older versions as well as the new versions, as well as the people that can work on them and how they can work on them. So this is, the equivalent of branching structure in RTC, as well as the stream structure. And I would say, let's ask that person the same question, what is Andrew Hu working on, and what is he allowed to work on? What changes would you say he's working on? If a defect is introduced in 2.0, what do you think Andrew is going to do as far as resolving that in the 1011 release of that product, as well as, let's say, they're working on what about his teammate, and could they both work on a given version? There's also now, obviously, Git is a distributed version control tool. Instead of, RTC is more of a centralized approach to SCM, but there is this concept of distributed source control, which would allow you, let's say, 2 independent implementations of RTC or repositories, would allow you then to target or flow target a stream in another repository or another system and deliver changes. So you still, the goal here was to provide some of the management and control capabilities that you benefit from in a centralized approach, but then still provide a facility for sharing changes across repositories and not make them isolated. There's also the ability to do some, core operations for SCM from the web interface, and so you've got multiple interfaces. You've got a web client. You've got your integrations to your IDEs like Eclipse and Visual Studio, as well as a command line client, and even a green screen client if you're using a mainframe tool. I'm sorry, a mainframe environment. And I think we cover this. I think I must have put the slide in twice. But again, this is about managing security at the same time, without having to go and update ACLs or be able to manage those kind of things and be able to simplify that that requirement. So in this way, I think what you'll find is, and this is like, for example, Jazz integration for the various components of Team Concert and even CLM, you'll find is there's a lot of various streams that are happening here with different people working on them. So provide isolation so these people can work in isolation on the various changes that they're responsible for, and they can, that's all managed and it's maintained on the server. But at the same time, they can team and share their changes, and those teams can share their changes with the larger product team or the larger organizational team. So, obviously, I think we've talked about SCM version control. It's really only one piece of the puzzle, and the question is, are you retrofitting the rest? And I think typically what happens is, as far as, well, SCM is what developers do, and so is the build management part of that. And as far as its relationship with the rest of the project, well, those relationships are loosely managed, and that's fine and okay. But, really there is some benefit to establishing the connection and relationship between that as well as all the other things that are happening. And one, very close relationship to that is build management. I think, beyond SCM, you've got your configuration management, and then beyond that, you've got your build management. So in build management, what you'd want to be able to do is then very quickly share changes and deliver changes. And this example shows that you've got this person, they've got a private workspace, and they're working on changes. And as they deliver, they could do private builds to see whether they're being successful at making changes and everything's working fine. and then they deliver changes up to a stream, and there's a team build that happens. Now, there's this feature like post-build deliver that says, okay, anytime it's green and we have a green line, we can continually progress it up. And this build structure, you could see we've working in a team together, and then we've got our product build, which is the various teams working together doing automated builds, and then we've got our weekly integration stream, and these could all be continuous integration, having their various schedule maybe running every few hours or so for each group. The other thing that I think is worth covering is the ability to show status and progress, so a dashboard that brings together information. And again, if you're using Git or some other product, you would, and including ClearCase and Synergy, you would consider the benefits of these capabilities alongside your SCM. So, having dashboarding capabilities with automatic information, coming directly from the repository across the SCM, build, your work item management, and if you're going beyond that, other areas as well. So here's a development dashboard that you can see showing, the successful builds as well as the build history, open items that we're tracking against builds, and those could be like items such as defects reported against a certain set of builds, and what everybody else is working on. This is a development dashboard. And then also being able to relate and govern changes like electronic signatures or required approvals and reviews. If you have code reviews at certain intervals, how does that establish? So again, these are all additional things beyond SCM that you may want to establish, and typically that you do, in a development project. I think what you'll find is that, there's much more to product level parallel development than just patching code, for a group. And any given activity typically takes a number of steps. And if you can imagine, patching a product and actually finally getting it into the product, what I think you'll find is, typically what you'll find is that people will go through a number of activities, and those activities, when optimized, will yield a better result than if you were to do them all separate, or the systems were not connected in a way that made for a very productive experience. And we're talking about high levels of productivity and finding and moving between these activities with a great deal of efficiency. And so that's really the goal. So consider the tasks that you might have that aren't necessarily related to SCM, but are connected and should be connected in order to enable an effective delivery. So you've got your changes, you make those changes, you create a new stream from a snapshot, building changes or patches to a given release, and then the various operations that would be involved in finally getting that out to the customer. I think you can do a value stream like this yourself. If you have, if you're doing development, what I would say is, and you're considering how are we doing certain things, consider, the value stream between the beginning of a given activity, like starting a patch, and till when it's finally implemented and live, and all of those actions that happen in between. So draw out the value stream and establish how you're doing them today. Color them with the various things that you use, and then establish how you may optimize that or improve that. So finally, what I wanted to close with is just a slide to show you when we surveyed our customers and that are using Team Concert, and we asked them what was the main benefit that you achieved after implementing RTC and using it. And this is, the rough breakdown of the responses. So improved process, improved team collaboration, improved transparency, and productivity and efficiency were the core values that, a customer, I would say, could expect to achieve based on customers that have already implemented and benefited from Team Concert. Okay, so with that, I am going to move on to the Q&A portion. So let me see how we could do this. I don't see any questions at this point. Let me take a look here. Does anybody have any questions? Are the lines open, or can we open the lines? Okay, and I'm trying to see if I have any questions in the queue here. Okay, and I see one question. So can build and deployment happen directly from Team Concert when you check in code to the stream? And after an automated build by Jazz, the Jazz build system, can you automatically have a WAR created and deployment happen and go through like a process for WebSphere application server through an automated process? And so, yeah, you can, the way that you would do this in RTC is you could define a build in RTC, and you could say build, only when there are new changes that have been delivered to the stream, and so the build would basically, operate or execute when some new changes were delivered. And there's this concept of post-build deliver, which says, if the build is good and green, then go ahead and move to the next step, and the next step could be, delivering to another stream or running a set of operations, which would include, packaging up the files and the binary and actually pushing that out to various locations. And, Ant is the main part of the toolkit that you could leverage in order to do some automation like that. There's also integrations into BuildForge and other products that you can do, that you can use. So that's, hopefully that answers that question. I see another question that says, how does this differ from Team Foundation Server? And I think what you'll find is that Team Foundation Server as well has an SCM component. It also has some change management capabilities integrated, and so they are very similar products. Team Concert is similar to Team System. I think the difference is our Rational Team Concert, our goal was really to make it more open. So we have customers that are exclusive to Visual Studio development. We have a lot of customers that also do Visual Studio development, as well as Java development, as well as even COBOL RPG development on the mainframe. And this would be one platform and solution to support all forms of development on a common environment and solution. And I know that TFS does have some plugins for Eclipse, but our goal is to wholeheartedly support all forms of development, beyond just core to a given platform or a single language. So who are the competitors? So obviously Microsoft is one. HP would be another one for their HP ALM product. Open source, and in this particular conversation we talked about, specifically we're talking about SCM. So I think, when you look at Git and Subversion, those are obviously popular open source tools. And so those would also be products that people would potentially consider for version control versus Team Concert. So a lot of times you run into those. If you have a question, feel free to submit it in the Q&A panel, and I will try and answer it. So I'll give you guys a minute while I just wrap up here and give you some closing thoughts. And that is that, obviously there's lots of ways to do version control. And what I've seen in the majority of areas or in companies is that, typically version control is considered a technical area or a technical field, and the managers who may not be as technical, they may leave it up to the developers to choose the most efficient form of development and version control even, and maintenance of version control with with the development team. And that's fine. I'm sure obviously the end user is the most important factor in making for a productive environment. But I think, and I hope you can appreciate this fact, is that as development happens across multiple products and projects and multiple versions of applications are introduced, and obviously one of the larger goals, and especially I've seen in commercial software development, you find is, well, let's reuse components so we can more maximize our value and efficiency, and even be able to mass customize what we're delivering. That becomes a much more difficult thing to do after you've kind of given an open approach, when you've left it to an open approach for each individual product and product version. When you try and go back and reconcile it, usually it's a much more painful reconciliation than if some of those factors were considered. So I would say, if you want, again, it's like thinking 2 steps ahead or even more than 2 steps. How can we potentially make for a very good software delivery development environment and a productive engine for delivering good quality software and also benefiting future projects and parallel projects. Okay, so if there are no more questions, I will wrap it up. Thank you for attending, and I hope to, at some point, talk to you soon. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for answering all the questions. Thank you for the insightful presentation as well, Mr. Nizami. It was a great session. I would also like to thank all our participants for their support in making this webinar a success. The recording of the session would be available on techgig.com by evening. Thank you all. Have a great day.